It doesn't matter if you've already drafted and maybe you're looking to make a trade, or you haven't drafted yet and now you need to know which wide receivers to take. Today, I'm going to be breaking down the top 35 expert consensus ranking wide receivers and then matching our top 35 up against it to see where we're different. Yo, Headliner Nation, we are in the final week of off-season content. Come next week, we're going to be diving into week 1 start and sits, rankings, waiver wires, all the good stuff. But there's a lot of you that may still need to do a draft. And if that draft is coming up, you probably want to know where we stand on some of the current top wide receivers in the game. Or maybe you've already drafted and you're wondering who are some guys that maybe you should trade for because we're a little bit higher on them than everybody else. And for the purposes of this video and like everything else we do on this channel, we are going to be talking about half PPR scoring because it allows everybody out there to get something from the video. If you play standard, you adjust down a little bit. If you play full, you adjust up a little bit. It's a lot easier than me talking full PPR and then people out there in standard leagues going, well, this doesn't help me at all. With that being said, we're hopping right into it, and our top 2 wide receivers are the same as the ECR, with Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase going 1 and 2, and I don't think that's a surprise to anybody because it seems to be like that for everybody. Now, the next few names are definitely going to be in a little bit of a different order. Not that it matters a whole lot, but we definitely feel like the upside is potentially better with a few guys that are just ranked lower than everybody else. Tyreek Hill coming in at wide receiver 3 right now, and we've got him at wide receiver 5. Nothing against Tyreek Hill, we just have him a little bit lower this season. I think a lot of it might have to do with just hoping that Tua stays healthy all year long. Cooper Kupp, who's the wide receiver 4, we've got down at wide receiver 8, and it's just because so much of his value is tied to Matthew Stafford, and I love Matthew Stafford, but here's the issue. He's breaking down. His body is giving out on him, and if he misses significant time again this season, does that hurt Kupp enough to drop him lower in the rankings? We're only 1 spot lower on Stefon Diggs, and it feels like every offseason I've had to beat the Stefon Diggs drum saying it just feels like this guy doesn't get enough love, that people take shots at other wide receivers over him that they feel like they have a higher upside. Within reality, Stefon Diggs has just been one of the most consistent high upside wide receivers in the game for a few years now, but we've got him just a little bit lower because there's a couple of guys we just like over him this year. Now, we are definitely higher on CeeDee Lamb and AJ Brown, and there's a lot of arguments against these guys, and quite frankly, I don't feel like any of them make a whole lot of sense. People are like, CeeDee Lamb can't go that high, he's attached to Dak Prescott. CeeDee Lamb was pretty darn good as a top 5 wide receiver last season with Dak Prescott. And now that they've added Brandon Cooks and Michael Gallup has had a full healthy offseason, their deep threats on the outside should allow for a lot more room over the middle for CeeDee Lamb. He had a ton of volume last season. He just got hit right after the catch way too much, and it's because everybody converged on him. This season, I definitely think that changes. That's why we've got him so high. People want to argue against AJ Brown because of Devontae Smith, but in reality, Devontae Smith never hurt AJ Brown last year. Dallas Goedert and Devontae Smith were the ones that hurt each other. AJ Brown was a top 10 option every stretch of the season last year, and if you're a little bit worried about his up and downs and if he has any inconsistencies, who cares? Justin Jefferson was actually one of the most inconsistent pass catchers in all of football last year. He had huge games and disappeared in others. So if that worries you about AJ Brown, then why are you drafting Justin Jefferson at number 1 overall? We're a spot higher on Amon-Ra St. Brown, and we absolutely love his volume potential, and we just hope that some of the big plays come with it. Last year, some of that efficiency and the big play ability just wasn't there, but like we just talked about with CeeDee Lamb, hopefully some of those added weapons helps open up the field for Amon-Ra St. Brown, and this is a guy that gets the volume and has the big plays. We've been very vocal about being much lower on Davante Adams this season than almost everyone else, and it shows in the rankings. Listen, Davante Adams is a great wide receiver, but last season, so much of his value is tied to the big play that dropping from Derek Carr to Jimmy Garoppolo is not great for that. And as much as you may hate Derek Carr, he was actually one of the better quarterbacks at throwing the ball 20 or more yards down the field last season. And Jimmy Garoppolo, before you argue that, hey, the offense he came from just didn't do that, No, it doesn't matter. Even from an efficiency standpoint, he was one of the worst, and by worst, I mean outside the top 32 quarterbacks, going 20 or more yards down the field last year. Are we saying that all of Davante Adams' production will come from the deep ball? Absolutely not. He's going to win at other places on the field. But keep in mind, this is a guy that had Aaron Rodgers, one of the best quarterbacks of all time, as his quarterback, and then switched over to Derek Carr, who he spent multiple seasons with in college. They already had a connection. Now he's going to Jimmy G. This is uncharted territory for Davante Adams. But we do have Garrett Wilson and Jaylen Waddle in front of Davante Adams. And for Garrett Wilson, he's got a lot of upside potential this year. In fact, maybe he becomes the Davante Adams that Aaron Rodgers once had. We'll have to wait and see how that happens. We know he's supremely talented. There's going to be a lot of weapons around him, and Aaron Rodgers should be looking his way quite often. And with Jaylen Waddle, we know Tyreek Hill is going to be the 1A in this offense, but we also know that Jaylen Waddle, even if he loses some volume, which he did last year, he's so good efficiency-wise that he's still going to have a really nice ceiling every single week. And look at that, we agree with Chris Olave at number 12. I think the big play potential is going to be there for him this season. I do think he could be a little inconsistent at times, but he's going to have some really nice upside, because remember a minute ago when I brought up how good Derek Carr was down the field last year? Chris Olave is going to benefit from that. I don't mind Devontae Smith as your wide receiver 2, but if you're trusting him as your wide receiver 1, I just cannot get on board with it. His end of the year last year was good, I understand that, but it was also with a banged up Dallas Goedert who stole a ton of his volume at the beginning of the season, and 2 of his biggest games down the stretch was with Gardner Minshew, not Jalen Hurts. Devontae Smith was the wide receiver 29 last season, before Dallas Goedert went down with his injury. That is a major concern for me this year if they're all on the field and healthy to begin the season. So do we need to worry about Devontae Smith getting lost in the weeds of the Eagles offense this year? Well, you know what we shouldn't have to worry about? It's our significant other getting lost in our weeds. And you can help out with that by heading on over to manscaped.com and picking yourself up a perfect package. If you use code word headliners at checkout, you're gonna get 20% off your entire order and free shipping. But maybe you don't need a perfect package. Go over and check out all of the awesome products that they have. It feels like their inventory of new products is growing every single day. So no matter what you get, use code word headliners so they know that we sent you over there. 20% off and free shipping. T. Higgins might be in sort of a similar situation as Devontae Smith is, but the reason I've got him higher is because we don't have to worry about such a heavy presence in the run game for Cincinnati like we do with the Philadelphia Eagles. And because of that, T. Higgins' upside does put him as a borderline 1 wide receiver in some weeks. So continue to keep an eye on him as your wide receiver 2. But once again, he's a guy that will bring inconsistencies, and as my wide receiver 1, I don't know if I'm on board with that. We're much lower on DK Metcalf than the consensus right now, and honestly, I think it's mostly because I just know how good Jackson Smith-Njigba is. If you're just finding out, this is a guy I touted as my wide receiver 1 in the class all offseason, and I know he's going to do really, really good things with Seattle this year. Now, how much time is he going to miss, though? I don't know. We'll have to keep an eye on that. DK Metcalf should still be the number 1 in this offense and should still see a decent amount of volume, but the problem with that becomes is how much volume does he lose to Tyler Lockett and Jackson Smith-Njigba, and does he have enough efficiency upside to make up for it? We've got Calvin Ridley at 17 compared to 16, and I think this is going to be another guy that has a ton of upside and a ton of big play potential. But Christian Kirk is not going anywhere, ladies and gentlemen. He could also be in for a season of another 130 targets, and Calvin Ridley will still get more than enough. And I think Trevor Lawrence is a dark horse for the MVP this year and is one of the biggest breakout candidates in football. Everybody's going to get some in this offense, and Calvin Ridley should see some big games. Now, I've got Keenan Allen all the way up at wide receiver 14, and maybe some of his volume does take a hit to Quentin Johnston. But like I mentioned with CeeDee Lamb earlier, his ability to work over the middle of the field now that they've got big play options on either side is absolutely crazy. Even if they decide to go with Palmer on the outside to start, that's okay. He's still a good field stretcher. Keenan Allen is going to see more than enough targets. And is he a wide receiver 1 still? Probably not. But because of how good he is over the middle of the field, and now hopefully a little bit more ability to stretch some of those targets into big plays, Keenan Allen is a guy that I think is being overlooked. And if you're trying to argue that he's injury prone, it's just not accurate. Yeah, he had some weird injuries at the beginning of his career, but since then, up until 2022, he had only missed 3 games over the last several seasons. I expect him to be at least healthier than he was last year, even though, again, he's getting a little bit older and may miss a few games. Amari Cooper was a really nice surprise last season, even at the beginning of the year with Jacoby Brissett. But what we might get out of him this year is a little bit lower of a ceiling, because it does appear Elijah Moore is going to be a big part of this game plan. David Njoku is a guy that Deshaun Watson likes in the red zone. And don't forget about our boy Nick Chubb, who's going to probably be one of the top rushers in all of football. Hopefully this offense stays a lot more balanced, but if it does, that could hurt some of Amari Cooper's upside. It'll be interesting to see how the 49ers try to get Deebo Samuel incorporated again into the offense, because a couple of years ago, he was one of the breakout stars in all the NFL, and then last year had a really up and down season. It'll be interesting to see what happens given the fact that he's not going to get touches in the backfield anymore. So can we work him out of the slot, and can we get him back to the yard after catch monster that he was a couple of years ago? We're definitely a few spots higher on DJ Moore, and I think it's worth it. I think this connection is going to be here with Justin Fields, and we even saw here in the preseason, there's a lot of things that DJ Moore does well after the catch. So even if he doesn't see some of that big playability that we saw start to finally kind of break up last year, that's all right, because wherever he is at on the field, he is going to win, and you might as well play to Justin Fields' strengths, whatever they are. We're only a spot lower on DeAndre Hopkins, and I don't think this is a DeAndre Hopkins of the past, where he's a volume monster and wins all over the field and is a top fantasy producer. I think the DeAndre Hopkins that we see this year sees a little bit less volume, comes in more along the lines of maybe 850 to 950 yards, and we keep our fingers crossed that he comes close to 10 receiving touchdowns. Christian Watson and Drake London back-to-back in the ECR. We're actually a lot lower on both of these guys. Christian Watson last year was very erratic in his big games. He had some big games and would disappear, and you would never know what you would get. And that was with Aaron Rodgers. I don't really know if we know what to expect now with Jordan Love, and I think that some of the short yardage guys like Romeo Doubs, Luke Musgrave, Aaron Jones are going to be the big benefactors in this lineup. And when you take a look at Christian Watson, he'll have some big games again, but we just never know when they'll hit. With Drake London, what are we getting with Desmond Ridder this year? With the addition of Bijan Robinson, Tyler Algier being one of the best running backs in terms of efficiency last year, we know they're going to run the football an awful lot. Kyle Pitts, can he stay healthy? Cordero Patterson, he's back. I just don't know if Drake London gets the amount of volume needed to be consistent on a weekly basis. Even with Terry McLaurin banged up right now, we're going to still put him right in this low-end wide receiver 2 area. I think Jahan Dotson could have a really big year this year. Antonio Gibson's getting involved in the passing game, and you're still going to run the ball with Brian Robinson. We'll also have to try and figure out who Sam Howell ends up becoming best friends with on this team. That's going to really make a big difference on who's going to get the most volume. Even though I like Brandon Ayuk, and he was a guy last year that I labeled as a potential breakout, I have to be very cautious with him, because Brock Purdy going down the field worked well at times last year, but that's just it. At times, the guys, Christian McCaffrey, George Kittle, Deebo Samuel, that work over the middle of the field so well, allow Brandon Ayuk to have one-on-one matchups on the outside. But those aren't going to be consistent targets. He's not going to be getting 10 to 12 targets a game. Brandon Ayuk is a guy where we look at Brock Purdy and we say, hey, every once in a while, we're going to see our play and we're going to take our shot. And that's going to be Brandon Ayuk. He's going to have some games where he's like wide receiver 8 to 15, and then he's going to have some games where he's like wide receiver 30 or lower because he just didn't get enough targets to sustain that type of success. We've got Chris Godwin all the way up at wide receiver 21 right now, because given the news that Baker Baker Mayfield is the starter in Tampa Bay, I think that Chris Godwin is the main benefactor with Baker Mayfield and what he does well. And we'll talk about Mike Evans in a minute, but Chris Godwin, even if he lacks some upside, which is why we have him a little bit lower in the rankings, should see a decent amount of targets, is why we still have him at wide receiver 21. We're right on the nose with the consensus and Tyler Lockett. We leave him right here. Given the injury to Jackson Smith-Njigba, the first few weeks he could be a little bit higher on this list, but by the time JSN comes back, Lockett probably evens out a little bit more and starts to fall more towards a low-end wide receiver 2 or high-end wide receiver 3. We are definitely lower on Deontay Johnson and Mike Williams. Now, I know Jake loves Deontay Johnson this year and is a much bigger fan of him than George Pickens, and I'm the other way around. I think we basically got these guys swapped in our rankings. George Pickens, I think, is going to have a huge year. We'll talk about him in a minute. But with Deontay Johnson, you're still going to get a decent amount of targets, but we got to get those touchdowns back that he missed out on last year. You've got George Pickens, who could be a potential breakout. You've added a couple of key role players this year. You still got Pat Freiermuth. You're going to run the ball with Najee Harris. Does Jaylen Warren get more involved? What does Darnell Washington do this year? I think there's a whole lot of questions, and that's one of the reasons why Deontay Johnson, I've got a lot lower this year, because I think we're going to be missing some of that upside we saw, because some of those targets he used to get are just not going to be there this year. And for Mike Williams, I'm sorry, but Quentin Johnston is the replacement for Mike Williams. So if Mike Williams can't stay healthy this year, Quentin Johnston's going to take his spot fairly quickly. And you still got a guy like Palmer on the outside that does a really, really good job of stretching the field. And this is just an offense that's going to spread the ball around a lot. Mike Williams is going to have some big games, but he's also going to have some poor games, and he's also going to be hurt. One guy that we continue to be high on this year after being high on him last year is Christian Kirk. And I think it's being completely overblown that Christian Kirk is going to take a huge hit to his fantasy value. I've broken down the numbers in several different videos. Christian Kirk could still easily see 130 targets this year, which is exactly what he saw last season. If that happens, he is still going to be a guy that has even more upside, given the fact that Calvin Ridley is going to cause a lot more chaos on the opposite side than what a guy like Marvin Jones did last season. Buy into Christian Kirk. He's one of the best slot receivers in all of football. Jerry Jeudy was a big preseason breakout candidate for me, but unfortunately his recent injury is going to put a damper on that. So I ended up having to move him down quite a bit. We've got him at wide receiver 33 right now. Hopefully, if he comes back healthy, he's a guy that moves himself back into the top 30-ish or so wide receivers. Courtland Sutton can see a little bit of bump before them, but it'll be interesting to see what happens to Courtland Sutton after Jerry Jeudy comes back, given the fact that we still don't know how much time Jerry Jeudy's actually going to miss. We do have Mike Evans up at wide receiver 30, and I think him breaking 1,000 yards this year is going to be very, very close. The biggest thing with him is just being highly efficient on the opportunities that he gets, because I think the volume will go to Chris Godwin, and I think they're going to try and run the football. But if you look on the outside at Mike Evans, this is going to be one of those things where you hope you get some one-on-one matchups that he takes advantage of. Marquise Brown at wide receiver 33, and quite honestly, at this point, you could probably go lower than that. It looks like they're going to have a rookie quarterback to start the season. They've been trading away guys. This doesn't look like a team that is out there trying to win anything this season. The only thing they're trying to win is that first overall pick in Caleb Williams. So at this point, Marquise Brown is not a guy that I'm really trusting all that much. Now, the last two guys here, Jahan Dotson and Michael Pittman, we are higher on both of these guys. Jahan Dotson, not a ton higher, because once again, when you got a guy like Terry McLaurin there that is an alpha type wide receiver, you're just not going to see the volume that you would like to see to be able to sustain like high wide receiver 2 numbers. But once again, you're going to have some big plays from Jahan Dotson, and you're going to have some big games, and that's going to be enough to offset some of those more poor games that you see. And Michael Pittman Jr., I think, is in for a really nice year. People are low on him because of Anthony Richardson, but is the #1 Anthony Richardson truther out there. And no, it's not because we share a last name. It's because I think he is supremely talented. Michael Pittman's going to get his. He's going to have some nice volume this year. Maybe not the big plays that we would like, but more than enough volume to be a solid guy that you can toss in every single week. There you go, Headliner Nation. I broke down the top 35 ECR wide receivers for you and then compared them to where we have them in our rankings. Now, if you want our full top 250 rankings, or if you need positional rankings for standard, half, and full PPR leagues, you gotta get our draft guide. The link is in the description down below. Only $21.99 with customizable cheat sheets that you can download to your computer and save, so you can move players around and even mark them off when you're drafting. But ladies and gentlemen, I gotta get out of here for right now. Hit the like button for me and subscribe if you're new here to the channel. And of course, leave me a comment down below letting me know a wide receiver or two that you're a little bit higher or a little bit lower on. Peace out, Headliner Nation. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll catch you all in the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.